was known as a first-class city. Our population swelled rapidly, partly because the city annexed some communities that were right around its outside borders, but mostly because people moved here to work in the iron and coal industries and other trades and businesses that grew along with the city and the surrounding townships. So it was this period just before steel overshadowed iron and the city truly became a metropolis in the early 20th century. This image shows a bird's eye view of Youngstown in 1882. And you can see, kind of the transitioning from more rural to, urban areas. This is the 1899 atlas, and I'm using this to illustrate how the city annexed how the city annexed other communities. So several small communities right outside the city limits had really established their own schools, churches, and businesses, but they remained unincorporated. So in 1880, citizens signed a petition to annex these communities into Youngstown. But of course, those communities had their own kind of culture and traditions and things that they didn't want to necessarily be part of Youngstown. So there was some resistance, but in 1889, those municipal limits were extended, and Briar Hill, Crab Creek, Hazleton, Lansingville, and other small communities around the city became officially part of Youngstown. So the 1880 census shows the total population of Youngstown to be about 16,000 people. Of the adult population, over half were foreign-born. The largest single non-native groups were Irish, followed by English, Welsh, German, Scottish, Swiss, Swedish, French, Italian, Hungarian, and Danish. This is an image of Peter Dybel and Sons meat market on West Federal Street. Of course, they were immigrants from Germany. African Americans migrated to the valley after the Civil War for the same reasons that Europeans did. Dissatisfaction with their home and desire to experience opportunities here. So they mostly came from Pennsylvania, Virginia, Louisiana, Kentucky, and Maryland, and Illinois. So in the 1880s, there were about 300 African Americans here in Youngstown, in the area. They worked as iron mill workers, bricklayers, laborers, barbers, foremen, hotel cooks and domestic staff, clerks, railway porters, mill engineers, teamsters, carriage painters, waiters, barbershop owners, ministers, shipping clerks, iron melters, and the list goes on and on. There was also an African American policeman here in the area as well. This man here is P. Ross Berry. Now, the Berry family came to Youngstown from Newcastle, Pennsylvania in the early 1860s. P. Ross Berry and his wife Mary Long Berry married in 1857, and Mr. Berry learned the trade of bricklaying as a boy. He would help with constructing different buildings in Newcastle, such as the Lawrence County Courthouse. And then when he moved here, and him and his young family to Youngstown, he was basically a contractor at that point. So this was a time when the building trades were in high demand. As we talk about, there's extreme growth, tremendous, infrastructure needed at this time. So he and his crew built such iconic structures as the Ray School, the Opera House, the Reuben McMillan Public Library, and many more. Lavinia Simpson was born in 1857 in Culpeper, Virginia, and she came with her family to Youngstown in 1870. She was a member of the 9th class of the Ray School, and she became the first Black student to graduate from there in 1875. She was also known locally as an accomplished vocalist and pianist. So during this period, before the turn of the century, home for many people took on kind of an opulent connotation, especially those who were making money, in the growing industry. Particularly this new wealth, again, brought on by industry, becomes displayed prominently throughout Youngstown. So many Youngstown homes really displayed richness unknown to previous generations. Here we see a view of homes along Wick Avenue. This was published in a pictorial history called Youngstown Illustrated. That was a 9-part series published in 1889. I'll be showing quite a lot of images from that publication throughout this presentation, but it really gives you kind of a time capsule look of the city and its growth during that period. Myron Converse Wick, who lived 1848 to 1910, was one of the founders of the Ohio Steel Company in 1892. He was also a charter member of Wick National Bank in 1894, which later merged with Dollar Savings and Trust Company. So Wick married Elizabeth Bonnell, who's pictured here, in 1882. She was the daughter of William Bonnell, one of the founders of Brown Bonnell and Company Iron Works. Early in their marriage, Myron and Elizabeth Wick lived at 519 Wick Avenue, as shown in this image here. Elizabeth is shown here with their son Philip on the porch of their home around 1890. The Wicks had 6 children, 5 of whom lived into adulthood. Unfortunately, one of their young daughters, Helen, passed away, and the Helen Chapel of which one? First Presbyterian, I thought so. First Presbyterian was named after their daughter. But of course, not everybody lived in that kind of opulence during this period. At the same time, you have huge numbers of people arriving in the city, mostly underprepared for the consequences of this mass influx of people. So there were tiny hovels or rooms in boarding houses that kept many people living in rather unsafe and unsanitary conditions. This is a little later image, but these are Italian immigrants, Mr. and Mrs. Raphael Cacciavalian, with their 9 children. This is in 1916. But this was photographed by the Christ Mission Settlement Association. And groups like that rose up in order to help those in need, because really the infrastructure of our city government and things just weren't there to help these people at that point. So let's talk about industry. The Mahoning Valley was one of the largest iron producing areas in the world by the 1870s. There were more than 1,500 people working in 21 blast furnaces and 13 rolling mills operating in the valley by 1876. So there were blast furnaces all over the river valley in Louisville, Struthers, Mineral Ridge, Niles, Warren, and Youngstown. And every day they produced 800 tons of pig iron. This is the Hazelton Iron Works at Coatesville Avenue and Center Street in the Hazelton neighborhood. Another view of that same iron works. And of course, Youngstown was situated at the center of 4 major rail lines and several smaller railroads, which strategically placed it to transport raw materials and finished products to major markets. These workers here are building a railroad trestle. The railroad came through the Mahoning Valley in 1856 and soon replaced the canal as a means for transporting the products of local industry. The rolling mills made hoop, band, and bar iron, railroad rails and spikes, sheet iron and plate iron, and nails, 550 tons of milled iron every day. Foundries made cast products like pots and pans, stoves, and grates, engine parts, and sash weights for window valance. There were also iron works that made tanks, boilers, and smokestacks. This is an image of the Mahoning Valley Iron Company works down on Crab Creek by Andrews Avenue. Their offices are at 722 Valley Street, so right down in the Smoky Hollow neighborhood area. Brown Bonnell and Company, shown here. So their blast furnace, puddling furnaces, and rolling mills sprawled in the bend of the Mahoning River, southeast of what is now Market Street Bridge. The company began in 1854. By 1875, it was one of the world's largest iron works, with 3 blast furnaces, 54 puddling furnaces, 11 heating furnaces, 40 nail machines, bar mills, and other machinery. And its coal came from local mines owned by the company. So talking about coal, of course it goes hand in hand with the iron industry, as coal was used to fire the blast furnaces. So in 1887, there were 23 coal mines in operation here, employing about 1,000 people and producing about 20,000 tons of coal. This is the Briar Hill Iron and Coal Works in Briar Hill, of course, which is 1 mile west of the city limits at that time. It was founded, this Briar Hill Coal, which started the business, was found on David Todd's farm, Briar Hill, thus the name. And it was of such high quality that it could be used straight out of the ground as fuel for these furnaces, rather than having to turn it into coke before using it in furnaces. So in 1847, James Wood and Company built a furnace in that neighborhood using the coal from the Briar Hill mines. David Todd, the owner of the property, purchased that furnace in 1861, and it later became the Todd Furnace of Briar Hill Iron and Coal Company. They built new furnaces in 1859 and 1860, known as Grace 1 and Grace 2 after David Todd's daughter. The company continued to grow, eventually becoming Briar Hill Steel in 1912. So about the same time Youngstown became a first-class city in the 1890s, industrialists started to convert their enterprises from iron making to steel making. The steel industry sprawled along all the riverbanks, dominating the city, and reached into every home and business in the valley. This image is circa 1910, and it's showing the mouth of Mill Creek near the Mahoning River, which is in the background. You can see the ice house building in the foreground, used at Mill Creek. But you can see, maybe, hopefully it's a little fuzzy, but along the riverbank there are, mills and things just kind of lining the entire bank of the Mahoning River at that point. So locally, some of the iron makers during this transition from iron to steel tried experimenting with rolling steel through their iron rolling mills, for cost effectiveness, but that effort failed. So they needed new technology, and they had to put their money together to get it. So in 1892, a group of iron masters combined their money to form the Ohio Steel Company. The new company built a Bessemer steel plant in the northwest corner of the city of Youngstown and went into production on February 4th of 1895. The Bessemer process was a recent breakthrough in steel making. They made steel in tons of time and steel tons at the same time that it took to make pounds with the older processes. So the Ohio Steel Company stayed in local hands until 1899, when it merged with the National Steel Company of Pittsburgh. Then the National Steel Company expanded into Youngstown and built new blast furnaces and other basic production facilities. And in 1901, they merged with Carnegie Steel Company to form the industry's new giant, the United States Steel Corporation. So this image here is right around the time of the merger into the U.S. Steel Corporation, so it's considered now U.S. Steel Ohio Works rather than the Ohio Steel Company. But this is a photograph from right around 1900 by a local photographer named John McGowan. Republic Iron and Steel Company. So Valley Iron Masters and others outside the area formed Republic Iron and Steel Company in 1899, and they were headquartered in Youngstown. Brown Bonnell and Company, the largest producers in the valley, and the Himrod Furnace Company, Andrews and Hitchcock, and others went together to form this new company. I'm going to take a drink of water. Sorry about that. So, Republic Iron and Steel built a Bessemer plant at Brown Bonnell Works near the South Avenue Bridge, expanded quickly, building at the old Andrews and Hitchcock Works near Center Street between Hazleton and Lansingville on the southeast side of the city. I'll give you a small preview into the development of the company that became a giant in the steel industry, Youngstown Sheet and Tube. It started in 1900 as Youngstown Iron Sheet and Tube Company, built on 300 acres between the Mahoning River and the lines of the Baltimore and Ohio and Pittsburgh, Lake Erie Railroads. But since the 20th century is beyond the scope of my presentation, I will leave it at that. So the workforce continued to grow to fill these iron and steel jobs. And it was immigrants who came here to work in this heavily industrialized city that we were building. This is an image of Republic Iron and Steel Company workers holding an iron bar with tongs as it runs through the bar mill of that facility. So these immigrants carried with them the materials and skills of their native cultures that required conscious effort to preserve against the flood of commerce and what they were experiencing in this new environment. This is an image of Syrian immigrants, photographed again by the Christ Mission Settlement Association. Members of the immigrant groups sometimes consciously shed any trace of their own culture in order to, assimilate into their new communities. But other members might hold on to their native ways tightly, just because they did not want to lose those traditions. It really, much depended on the individual or their circumstances. This is an image of Greek women taking an English class, courtesy of the International Institute. The Institute helped immigrants adapt to their lives in the new country here. Michael McGovern was an Irish immigrant, and he worked as a puddler. Puddlers were skilled and supervised the critical phase of iron making. They faced heat and smoke and sparks, and they stirred the batches of molten iron until the metal formed balls. They made tons of iron ingots every day. McGovern wrote poetry about his work, and so he was known as the puddler poet. And his book, Labor Lyrics and Other Poems, was published in 1899. So downtown Youngstown flourished during this time. You have an influx of people into the city, and you need infrastructure, shopping, entertainment, things for those individuals. So it happened downtown. With the opening of the Opera House in 1872, Youngstown entered the world of big city entertainment. Now the image on the left, the big building there, is the Mahoning National Bank. But to the right of it, there's that little sliver. That is the Opera House building. I'm sure we've shown it to you before, but maybe you haven't been here. To the right of that is the interior of the Opera House. You can see just how opulent and beautiful it was designed for the people of Youngstown. There were other downtown venues in the 1880s, like the Bijou Theater on East Federal Street and the Globe Museum on West Federal Street. And then, of course, saloons also entertained large numbers of people. Businesses opened downtown to accommodate the needs of the growing population. You had pawnbrokers, drugstores, cigar stores, dry goods and feed stores. John Brenner opened his jewelry store on West Federal Street in 1880. And here is an 1889 view of West Federal Street from the public square. Another view of that same area, but zoomed in a little further, shows McKelvey's and Strauss, and what was then called the Enterprise Store, but I'll show you.
And then McKelvey's is right over here. There's actually a third department store down the way called Ewers, but apparently it did not last, stand the test of time like Strauss and McKelvey's did.
Is that where the buildings ended up, or did it end up further?
No, that was
Same
their,
spot.
yep, same location, yeah. They expanded, but they were in that same location. So George McKelvey acquired his West Federal Street mercantile that became GM McKelvey and Company in 1883. And Bernard Hirschberg and Isaac Strauss moved their enterprise store to the Wick Building on West Federal Street in 1887, and it would become incorporated as Strauss Hirschberg Department Store in 1906. The Youngstown Carriage and Wagon Company began in 1881 on West Federal and Hazel Streets downtown. Then they built this huge office and factory building on the southeast corner of West Boardman and Hazel Streets. They profitably manufactured Vaughn's patent road wagon, buggies, phaetons, surreys, jump seats, and storm spring buckboards. And eventually, in the 20th century, they would convert their operations to automobile manufacturing. George J. Renner Sr. first opened Renner Grosswater Brewing Company in Akron, and George Renner Jr. came to Youngstown in 1885 and purchased the city brewery on Pike Street on the south side of Mahoning River. It remained known as the city brewery until 1918, which is when it became Renner Brewing. But 3 generations of the Renners ran the brewery in Youngstown, and they bottled beer there until 1962, when another company took over. This is an 1889 city directory ad for Renners. The first horse car, which was a streetcar pulled by horse on tracks laid throughout the city streets, made its debut on May 5th of 1875, with a fare of less than 6 cents per ride. Electric streetcars took the place of these horse cars in the 1890s. The newly formed Youngstown Street Railway Company was given permission by the city to build a new electric streetcar line. Other railway companies soon emerged to expand service throughout Youngstown and the outlying areas. Youngstown's steel industry was growing, and the rail lines provided steel workers with convenient transportation to and from the mills. This is an electric streetcar operated by the Mahoning Valley Electric Railway, which was established in 1894 to run from Youngstown through Girard to Niles. Streetcars, of course, were used for more than just work transportation. The Youngstown Park and Falls Street Railway received the franchise for the nearly 5-mile route that connected Central Square downtown to an amusement park near Lanterman's Falls in Mill Creek Park. Here you see people lining up for that trolley. Service to Terminal Park, later called Idor Park, began on May 30th of 1899 and was situated on a loop that became the most traveled line in Youngstown. Here are some park goers right around the turn of the 20th century here. Farming. So, we've talked a lot about manufacturing and industry, but farming was still a big part of our economy at this time. The communities in other, right on the river and then in other places in Mahoning County remained farming communities. The annual fair of the Mahoning County Agricultural Society continued to draw crowds and interest. Of course, better known as the Canfield Fair. Here you have an image of the Canfield Fair hosting Warren G. Harding. In 1887, 94,853 acres of land in Mahoning County were being cultivated, with agricultural products being produced in abundance, including wheat, oat, corn, hay, potatoes, butter, and cheese. This image of Lindley Vickers is on his family farm in Ellsworth Township. Lindley's father was Ernest, and he was an amateur photographer as well as a Mill Creek Park naturalist. So he took this photo Lindley also later followed in Ernest's footsteps, being a Oak Creek Park naturalist as well. Soon after Youngstown became a city of the second class in 1868, City Council funded police, fire, and hospital services to take care of the growing population. But the police, they had very small beginnings. The police department began with one night policeman in each ward, the population being expected to police itself during the day. Can you imagine? There was also a city marshal, which was an elected position, basically a chief of police. This image shows the central police station right around 1918. The founding of the fire department coincides with that time period as well, but its establishment was credited to David Todd, the former governor of Ohio, whose house burned down in the winter of 1867, and then who pushed for city council to buy an engine and hose reel wagon to organize volunteers for a new fire department. And in this image you see the Governor Todd engine house. It's the building with the arched roof that's kind of right in the middle left of the photo. In 1890, the fire department was reorganized, with all the firemen being paid instead of volunteer. They also added an additional 15 new firemen and a plan to build 3 new fire stations. So this is a closer look at that Governor Todd engine house, #1 fire station, which was located in downtown. So we talked about police and fire. Now we need hospitals. In 1881, a group of citizens, including this man, German immigrant Dr. William Baker, formed the Youngstown Hospital Association and recruited the doctors from the Mahoning County Medical Society for a new hospital. And it opened in 1883. It was called the City Hospital. And it was located in a pleasant park-like area on the corner of what is now Ridge and Oak Hill Avenues, basically directly across from Oak Hill Cemetery. It was a wooden frame house with 3 stories, 30 beds, and 6 private rooms. By the end of the century, the hospital ran a training school for nurses. A general sewer system for the city was installed before 1880, with improvements taking place in 1882. They added a new main west of Crab Creek, but unfortunately, waste from the sewers found its way into the river, causing outbreaks of malaria. This image is a little earlier, probably right around 1870, and it's showing piping that is being laid out in anticipation of laying for sewers with construction workers surrounding it. Paving replaced downtown's dirt roads by 1883 as a combination of asphalt used on Market and East Federal Streets, as well as granite cobblestones used on West Federal Street. This is a view showing an unpaved felt street between Wick Street, which is now Commerce, and Wood Street. So the dirt roads, of course, easily developed ruts from the carriage wheels, became very muddy and messy when it rained. So the upgrade to paving was definitely a welcome change. Now, the Youngstown Library Association was established in 1880 and later named the Reuben McMillan Library, now called the Public Library of Youngstown and Mahoning County. They purchased the Richard A. Brown home on Market and Front Streets as the site of the first dedicated library building in 1889. And prior to that, it had rooms and buildings on Federal and Hazel Streets downtown. Telephone service came to Youngstown in 1880. After City Council voted to install poles and wiring for the first telephone exchange. The exchange was located at the northwest corner of Central Square, and about 30 local residents had telephone installed that year, including Henry Bonnell. Electric lighting came to Youngstown in 1886, with 145 arc lights illuminating the city. By 1888, the city's power plant located on East Wood Street provided 175 streetlights and 70 commercial lights. Now, this is a later image, dating to about 1915, that shows, of course, the modernized electrification of downtown, but those foundations were laid back in the 1880s. Also interestingly, in 1888, GM McKelvey Company built a private power plant to run its own incandescent lighting display, and Brown Bonnell Works had its own private power plant by 1880. We've seen this image before, but I'm going to talk about a different building. This is an 1889 view of the mayor's office, which is the building on the corner next to the Todd Engine House. So by 1890, of course, Youngstown's government could not keep up with the rapid population growth and expansion of the city. So in 1891, the Ohio State Legislature passed a measure that cities with populations between 33 and 34,000, note that Youngstown's population is 33,200 at this point, should have a board of city commissioners to take on some of the responsibilities previously held by the mayor and city council. So they basically made this law for Youngstown. It's so specific. So the 4 commissioners were elected officials and were tasked with appointing the chief of police, among other duties. And I can't fail to mention, of course, that 1896 saw the election of Niles's own president, William McKinley. McKinley was a good friend of local industrialist and philanthropist Joseph G. Butler Jr., who was instrumental in the local transition from iron to steel. And while I don't have an image to show here, I also wanted to mention another important local figure from that period. After the sinking of the USS Maine in Cuba in 1898, President McKinley was authorized by Congress to retaliate with military force, beginning the Spanish-American War. And locally, John A. Logan Jr. formed the Logan Rifles, which served in the Ohio National Guard during that war. John A. Logan Jr. was the son of General John A. Logan of Illinois, who served in the Union Army during the Civil War, and was credited with the establishment of Decoration Day on May 30th as a day of remembrance and to decorate the graves of the war dead in the 1870s. We now know that as Memorial Day, in honor of all Americans who died in service to their country. So Major Logan Jr. followed in his father's footsteps. He attended West Point, moved to Youngstown, and married Edith Andrews, who was the daughter of industrialist Chauncey Andrews. This is where he formed the Logan Rifles that served during the Spanish-American War of 1898. And then after that war ended in Cuba, Logan and his militia moved on to serve in the Philippines to help put down the communist insurgency there. Unfortunately, Logan was killed in battle in 1899. His body was returned here to Youngstown, where it's buried at Oak Hill Cemetery. He was posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is quite the distinction, of course. So here's an individual some of us might recognize. This is Bonnie Rogers, and his lasting contribution to Youngstown and Mahoning County was the fight to create and maintain Mill Creek Park. So as the end of the century approached, Rogers was aware of the bad effects of the population, that the population was suffering under the industrial waste and crowded living and working conditions brought on by industry. So he himself often took refuge from these conditions in the cool gorge of Mill Creek Park. He watched as land along the creek was sold to sawmills and more land was being eyed for a stone quarry. So he wanted to halt those developments, which could threaten the health of the people further. So in 1891, voters overwhelmingly approved his proposal for the creation of Mill Creek Park. And in 1893, the park opened, and Rogers spent the rest of his life protecting it against proposals that would have ruined the unparalleled beauty of the park. Here's an image of the park from that era as well, the umbrella rocks that I think a lot of us recognize as well. Education. So during this period, Youngstown schools expanded in size and number to accommodate the continuing increase in population. Rand School, of course, was built in the 1856. Anyway, it continued to be the only high school in the area, though private business schools, such as Hall's Business University, gave adolescents an alternative to the college-type courses at Rand. But in addition, there were a dozen public schools built in the city between 1880 and 1900, including the Elm Street School in 1883. There's a class in front of that school. And the Hillman Street School in 1884. With diversity in the religions among the population, the parochial schooling was also growing during this period. The Ursuline Sisters took charge of Catholic schooling in 1874. So this is St. Columba's School, which was the first Catholic school in the area, opened in 1860. Next you had St. Anne in 1869, St. Joseph in 1870, and Immaculate Conception School in 1883. Lutheran churches also established parish schools around this time. St. Paul Church and Emmanuel's Lutheran Church opened schools in 1881 and 1882. Now this is not the school, but this is Emmanuel's Lutheran Church here in Youngstown. Oh, actually it was in the Briarcrell area. So there were dozens of local fraternal, professional, and social and civic organizations established in the region during this time as well. They included Masonic lodges, Independent Order of Oddfellows, B'nai B'rith, abstinence and temperance groups, the Youngstown Manor Corps, the Grand Army of the Republic, and others. This image of the Youngstown Manor Corps shows the group in the 20th century in front of their building on Mahoning Avenue. This gentleman was born in 1845, Private James A. Kelly. He served from 1863 to 1865 in Company E of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry. And after he moved to Youngstown, he became a member of Todd Post number 29 GAR, which was a veterans organization aimed at helping the veterans to socialize and meet others. The vast majority of women in the Mahoning Valley, as across the country, married, bore children, and had full responsibility for the care of their household and all within it. They really shouldered a lot of the leadership roles in the household because fathers, of course, spent their time away from home, working, and less time with the children. Still, women left home to socialize with each other when time allowed, and the 1890s brought sort of a women's club movement, with many groups being formed locally. In 1891, the Coterie Club was founded with 25 members. In 1892, the Friday Afternoon Club, as you can see a program here. Then you have the Wairodasis Club, which stands for wife, mother, daughter, sister. A little bit of a mouthful. The Tourist Club shown here was founded in 1894. And then in 1894 as well, a group called the Research Club. Trade unions were also growing during this time all over the country because laborers were seeking better working conditions for themselves. In 1881, the workers organized the Amalgamated Iron, Steel, and Tin Workers, Ayers Lodge, with 63 charter members. Also during this period, unions were chartered for electricians, machinists, retail clerks, cigar makers, iron molders, stage employees, plumbers, tailors, bartenders, and restaurant workers, rail workers, carpenters, and many more. And that's all local. These are puddlers from Brown Bonnell Company, Ironworks, and you can see how young some of them are. So unions really sought for shorter working hours, better wages and safety conditions. And of course, child labor laws eventually put an end to children in the workforce. Well, and so by 1900, Mahoning Valley was poised for even greater growth, with the steel industry set to dominate the local landscape, inviting further population expansion with the growth of these industrial jobs. We'll leave our presentation here. Brooke Bobovnik will pick up next month with her topic, the modernization of Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley from 1900 to 1910. Thank you so much for your time. Does anybody have questions?